Welcome to BK Academy of Chess, where together we build, and over the board, we even the score. This video will help improve your opening knowledge, including some of the most popular traps. Let's start with G3. This is the King's Fianchetto opening. Knight F3 is the ready opening. D5. C4. The ready gambit. G3. This is the King's Indian attack. F4 is the bird's opening. B3. The Nxd4 attack. C4 is the English opening. E5 is the King's English variation. C5 is the symmetrical variation. E4 is the King's pawn opening. Knight F6 is the Alekhines defense. G6. D4. Bishop G7. Knight C3. C5. This is the modern defense, standard, pterodactyl defense. C6 is the Caro-Kann defense. D4. D5. E takes D5 is the exchange variation. C takes D5. C4. This is the Caro-Kann defense, Panov attack. E5 is the advance variation. Knight C3. D takes E4. Knight takes E4. Bishop F5. The classical variation. C5 is the Sicilian defense. Knight C3 is the closed variation. Knight C6. F4. The Grand Prix attack. C3 is the Alapin variation. D4 is the Smith-Morr gambit. After C3. D takes C3. Knight takes C3. Knight C6. Knight F3. E6. Bishop C4. Queen C7. Castle. Knight F6. Queen E2. Here, white's planning to push the e-pawn. However, black can set the Siberian trap with what move? Knight G4. Yeah. Good move. Bearing down hard on the H2 square, enticing white to chase away the knight with H3. Whoa, that's a blunder. But black has what move? Knight D4. Yeah. Good move. Not only is the knight attacking the queen, it is also threatening checkmate by attacking the knight guarding the critical H2 square. Knight F3. E6. D4. C takes D4. Knight takes D4. A6. This is the Kann variation. Knight C6 is the Taimanov variation. Knight C6. D4. C takes D4. Knight takes D4. G6 is the old Sicilian, open, accelerated dragon variation. D6. D4. C takes D4. Knight takes D4. Knight F6. Knight C3. G6 is the Sicilian defense, open, dragon variation. A6 is the Najdorf variation. E6 is the Scheveningen variation. Knight C6. Bishop G5 is the classical, Richter-Rosser variation. Knight C6. Bishop C4 is the Fischer-Zinn attack. Here, black usually plays E6. However, G6? That's dubious. Falling into the Magnus Smith trap. After Knight takes c6. Black takes c6. White has what move? e5. Yeah. Good move. For example, after d takes e5. White wins the queen. With what move? Bishop takes f7. d5. This is the Scandinavian defense. E takes d5. Knight f6. The modern variation. e6. This is the French defense. d4. d5. e5 is the advanced variation. E takes d5 is the exchange variation. Knight d2. The Tarrasch variation. Knight c3. Knight f6 is the classical variation. Bishop g5. D takes e4 is the French defense, classical, Bern variation. D takes e4 is the Rubinstein variation. Bishop b4, the Winauer variation. d6 is the Peertz defense. d4. Knight f6. Knight c3. g6. f4 is the mainline, Austrian attack. Knight f3 is the classical variation. e5. Knight c3 is the Vienna game. Knight f6. f4. The Vienna gambit. d5. F takes e5. Knight takes e4. d3. Kicking the knight, and enticing black to fall for the Wurzburger trap, with queen h4. g3. Knight takes g3. Knight f3. Queen h5. Knight takes d5. Now white threatens knight takes c7. And also threatens to win the knight by releasing the pin on h2. With knight f4. The game could continue as follows: bishop g4. Knight f4. Bishop takes f3. Knight takes h5. Bishop takes d1. H takes g3. And after, bishop takes c2. Bad move. White has what move? White traps the bishop with b3. f4. This is the king's gambit. d5 is the king's gambit declined, Falkbeer counter gambit. Bishop c5. The classical variation. E takes f4 is the king's gambit accepted. Bishop c4 is the bishop's gambit. Knight f3. d5. The modern defense. Bishop c4 is the bishop's opening. Knight f3. Knight f6 is the Petrov's defense. d4 is the Steinitz attack. Knight c3. The Petrov's defense, 3 knights game. Knight takes e5. d6 is the classical attack. After, knight f3. Knight takes e4. d4. d5. Bishop d3. Bishop d6. Castle. Castle. c4. Bishop g4. C takes d5. f5. White gets caught in the Marshall trap with rook e1. Bad move. Because black has what move? Bishop takes h2. Yeah. Good move. Followed by king takes h2, knight takes f2, etc. d6. This is the Philidor defense. Knight c6. Bishop b5 is the Ruy Lopez opening. Bishop c5. The classical defense. f5 is the Yanish gambit. Knight f6 is the Berlin defense. d3. Here, black can set up the Mortimer trap with knight e7. This may not be the best move. However, it is very solid, which makes this an excellent trap to play. And as you will see, it's a fun position to play from both sides of the board. Now if white takes the bait with knight takes e5. Bad move. Because black has what move? c6? Yeah. Good move. Threatening to win a piece with queen a5. So how should white play? Knight c4. A tricky move, preventing queen a5. So now how should black play? Notice that white is threatening to end the game with knight d6. d6. Yeah. Good move. Now after bishop a4. Black wins a piece with what move? b5. d6 is the old Steinitz defense. Here, if white continues with a6, bishop takes c6. This is the Morphy defense, exchange variation. Bishop a4. d6. And if white continues with d4, b5, bishop b3, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, e takes d4. The nose trap has been set. White cannot take the bait with queen takes d4. Whoa, that's a blunder. Because black has what move? c5. Yeah. Good move. Now black starts raining down pawns on white's position, preparing to close the door on white's bishop with c4. As follows. Queen d5. Bishop e6. Queen c6. Bishop d7. Queen d5. c4. Knight f6. Castle. Knight takes e4. This is the open variation of the Ruy Lopez. d4. b5. Bishop b3. d5. d takes e5. Bishop e6. c3. Bishop e7. Rook e1. Castle. Knight d4. Here, how should black continue? If black proceeds blindly by simply completing its development with queen d7. Bad move. Black has fallen for the Tarrasch trap. Now, white has what move? Knight takes e6. Followed by what move? Rook takes e4. Bishop c4 is the Italian game. Here the line continues with bishop e7. The Hungarian defense. Or black could set a trap with what move? Knight d4. That's dubious. However, if white takes the bait with knight takes e5, black has what move? Queen g5. Yeah. Good move. After knight takes f7. Whoa, that's a blunder. It loses to what move? Queen takes g2. For example, after rook f1. Queen takes e4. Bishop e2. Black has what move? Checkmate n1 with knight f3. Checkmate. d6 is the semi-Italian opening. d4 is the Scotch game. E takes d4. Knight takes d4. Bishop c5 is the classical variation. Queen h4 is the Steinitz variation. Knight f6. Knight takes c6. Black takes c6. e5 is the Scotch game, Schmidt, Missy's variation. Knight c3. Knight f6 is the Four Knights game. d4 is the Scotch variation. Bishop c4. Bishop c5. This is the Gioco Piano game. b4. The Evans gambit. Knight f6. The Italian game, two knights defense. d6 is the semi-Italian opening. Knight c3. Bishop g4. h3. After bishop h5. Bad move. Allowing white to set the legal trap with. What move? Knight takes e5. Yeah. Good move. Now the bait is set. Bishop takes d1. Whoa, that's a blunder. Winning the queen but losing the game after. What move? Bishop takes f7. King e7. Knight d5. Checkmate. E takes d4. c3 is the center game accepted, Danish gambit. d4 is the queen's pawn opening, c5. This is the old Benoni defense. g6, the modern defense with d4. f5 is the Dutch defense. e4. F takes e4. The Staunton gambit accepted. c4. Knight f6. g3. g6. Bishop g2. Bishop g7. Knight f3 is the Dutch defense, Leningrad, main line. e6. Bishop g2. Bishop e7. Knight f3. Castle. Castle. d5. The Stonewall variation. Knight f6. Bishop g5 is the Trempowski attack. c4. e5 is the Budapest gambit. D takes e5. Knight g4. Bishop f4. Knight c6. Knight f3. Bishop b4. Knight b d2. Queen e7. a3. And after knight g takes e5. The Kieninger trap has been set. So how should white play? Not. A takes b4. Whoa, that's a blunder. Black wins. With what move? Knight d3. Checkmate. g6. This is the King's Indian. Knight c3. d5 is the Gronfeld defense. Bishop g5. The Stockholm variation. Knight f3 is the Three Knights variation. Bishop f4 is a Brinkman attack. C takes d5. Knight takes d5 is the exchange variation. Bishop g7 is the King's Indian defense, normal variation. Knight f3. d6. g3 is the normal, fianchetto variation. e4. d6. f4 is the King's Indian defense, four pawns attack. f3 is the Samish variation. Bishop e2. Castle. Bishop g5 is the Overback variation. Knight f3. Castle. Bishop e2 is the orthodox variation. e5. D takes e5. Knight c6. b4 is the King's Indian defense, bayonet attack. d6 is the Old Indian defense. e6. g3 is the Catalan opening. d5. Bishop g2 is the Catalan opening, closed. Knight f3. b6 is the Queen's Indian defense. Bishop b4 is the Bogo Indian defense. Bishop d2. If black continues with bishop takes d2, queen takes d2, b6, g3, bishop b7, bishop g2, castle, knight c3, knight e4, queen c2, and after knight takes c3, white sets the Monticelli trap with what move? Knight g5. Yeah, good move. Threatening bishop takes b7. And queen takes h7. Checkmate. Knight e4. h4. Knight c3. Bishop b4 is the Nimzo Indian defense. Queen c2 is the classical variation. e3. c5 is the Hubner variation. Knight ge2 is the Nimzo Indian defense, Hubner, Rubinstein variation. a3. Bishop takes c3. Black takes c3 is the Samish variation. c5. d5. b5 is the Benko gambit. e6 is the Benoni defense, modern variation. d5. c4 is the Queen's gambit. c6 is the Slav defense. d takes c4 is the Queen's gambit accepted. e5 is the Queen's gambit declined, Albin counter gambit. d takes e5. d4. Here, white has what move? The main line continues with f3. However, e3. Bad move. It can lead to the Lasker trap after bishop b4. Bishop d2. d takes e3. The bait has been set. Now, how should white continue? Not with bishop takes b4. Whoa, that's a blunder. Black has what move? E takes f2. And after king e2, black has what move? F times g1. Promoting to a knight. Yeah. Good move. It's winning for black. Knight c6 is the Queen's gambit declined, Chigorin defense. e6. Knight f3. c5 is the Queen's gambit declined, pseudo-Tarrasch defense. Knight c3. Knight f6. Knight f3. c6 is the semi-Slav defense. c5 is the three knights, semi-Tarrasch defense. Bishop g5. Bishop e7. e3. Castle. Knight f3. Knight bd7 is the Queen's gambit declined, orthodox defense. with the move knight bd7. Black sets the elephant trap. If white tries to win a pawn with c takes d5, e takes d5, knight takes d5. Whoa, that's a blunder. Because black has what move? Knight takes d5. Yeah, good move. For sure, because after bishop takes d8, black wins the queen back with bishop b4. Queen d2. Bishop takes d2. And after king takes d2, king takes d8. And black's up a piece. Knight f6. Bishop g5 is the Richter-Virasov attack. Knight f6. Bishop f4 is the London system. Bishop g5 is the queen's pawn opening, true attack. e4 is the queen's pawn opening, black ma gambit. D takes e4. Knight c3. Knight f6. f3. E takes f3. Queen takes f3 is the tighter gambit. Queen takes d4. Bishop e3. Here if black continues with queen b4. Here, white sets the Halasser trap with what move? Castle queenside, baiting black to play bishop g4. Bad move. Because white has what move? Knight b5. Yeah, good move. Threatening knight takes c7. Checkmate. The black queen cannot capture the knight because white can recapture with check, giving the queen time to x-cap. Thanks for tuning in to BK Academy of Chess, where together we build, and over the board, we even the score.